we came on together today to talk about being a woman and being a healthy woman and women's rights, like real women's rights.
I have to laugh because, this book, The Wisdom of Menopause, you see how thick it is? It's got all the stuff in here. It got everything you need to know.
Pregnancy is a vulnerable thing, and it has been completely co-opted by extremist maximalist thinking.
This would never happen today. A nurse came up to my mother and she said, if I were you, I would get him out of here.
That's the cultural norm around abortion. That's my framework. That's what I grew up with. This is very different than what a 16-year-old girl is taught today.
I'm on a whale watch in Cape Cod Bay, and the Wall Street Journal calls me and said, they've just stopped the Women's Health Initiative because they're finding too many women are getting heart attacks.
I'm Nicole Shanahan. Welcome to Back to the People podcast, which highlights the growth of a movement uniting America, where our government is free from corporate capture and where we give voice back to the American public. Dr. Christiane Northrup, thank you so much for joining me today on Back to the People podcast.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to meet you. Thank you.
Likewise, I've known of your work. I've followed your work. I've been very inspired by your work over the years. It makes so much sense. I believe it is, the story that women want to know about, but they're often kept in the dark from something that has been generational and passed down from, in all different societies, this wisdom of femininity, the wisdom of womanhood. And somehow, in the developed world, or however you want to call it, developed medicine, they've done away with many of these wise traditions. So tell me your story. I know that you've been a practicing OB. You went to very prestigious institutions. You're traditionally, or I guess you could say mainstream trained.
Yes.
Did you go into mainstream medicine? Were you raised with these traditions and then you went into mainstream medicine, or did you find them as a result?
No, I was raised with them. I like to say I was fully radicalized before medical school. And the reason is my aunt and uncle, my dad's brother and sister, were both medical doctors. He was a dentist, but he had been in a MASH unit in World War II. So he did a tremendous amount of facial reconstruction and so on. And when he came home from the war, he was very interested in the work of Weston Price. Weston Price is the dentist who visited all of these indigenous cultures and found out that their dentition and their oral arch and palate, all of that was wrecked within one generation of eating Western food, like refined food and sugar and so on. So that book was on my dad's bedside table. So I grew up with those pictures of Weston Price, who was a dentist. So we grew up on Adele Davis, and we had a compost heap, and my mother spiked our orange juice with vitamin C. But the real deal was my mother was pregnant with my sister Bonnie, but she had viral pneumonia, and they gave her an antibiotic. I think it was streptomycin every single day because antibiotics were new and they were the wonder drug. Everyone was given penicillin for everything. And so she was given this for viral pneumonia, which we know would never have worked. That baby was born, and I named her, and she wouldn't eat and died finally in the hospital in a pool of her own vomit. My mother couldn't even hold her because that's how it was back then. And then my brother was born, and he wouldn't eat, and we didn't know why. And a nurse, this would never happen today, a nurse came up to my mother and she said, if I were you, I would get him out of here. The doctors don't know what's going on, and it would be better if you could have him die at home with the family around. So my parents signed him out against medical advice. Again, you couldn't do that now. And every hour on the hour, we fed him with a nasogastric tube. My mother was told that he was mentally defective and that he would never live. And they kept trying to find the answer Uh, so we were keeping him alive with this tube, and I never saw him without adhesive tape on his face till he was a year old. At a year old, he weighed 10 pounds. And
Oh,
finally, my mother and dad found a doctor at Women's Medical, which was in Philadelphia, who was a pioneer in pediatric endoscopy, looking down with a fiber optic light, something that my parents had been told that they did at Buffalo Children's, but they didn't. She puts the light down. She said, the esophagus is so irritated that the tube will rupture into the mediastinum here if we don't take the tube out. So let's just take it out and see what happens. And 3 days later, he started to eat. And I remember my mother bringing him home from the airport, and we all go to meet her, and he's eating a roll that the stewardess had given him, and we all cried. And now he runs an international, HVAC company. And when I went for my medical school interview at the University of Buffalo, my brother's primary physician was the guy who interviewed me, and he said, "Oh, you're not from those Northrups in Ellicottville, are you?" "Yes, I am." And, my mother then took him in a while later, I remember this, for grand rounds, where they present the case, and then charged her for an office visit. And so I went to medical school knowing that doctors weren't gods. So remember, I've got an aunt and an uncle who are both MDs. They don't know what to do. My dad had done enough with medicine to know that he could at least feed him with an NG tube. And so this was such a pivotal thing. Then, when I was interviewing around for medical schools, my dad got chest pain and ended up in Buffalo General in the CCU, the cardiac intensive care unit. And day 3, he calls my mother, Edna and Wilbert. "Edna, come and get me. They don't know what's going on." The IV had infiltrated, so he had a fever from all of that fluid in his arm,
an
and
infection.
he said, "They don't know what's going on." He gets up, chest leads coming off him, didn't bring a wheelchair because the nurses were mad, and he walked out of there. And when I came back from that trip for looking at med schools, he's sitting up in his chair with fluid 2/3 of the way up in his lung fields because he couldn't lie down because of the fluid here. And he got better at home. And indeed, he had had infectious pericarditis. It had not been a heart attack, and he healed at home. So imagine, I had these experiences, and I got some scholarships. I went to Case Western Reserve in Cleveland, studying applied music with the harp. My harp teacher was there, and also just was a biology major, was never pre med, but I had some scholarships. And my dad finally says to me, "Well, you got to do something after 4 years. You might as well have an MD after your name." And then I go to med school to Dartmouth and saw a baby born and just about fell to the
Uh-huh.
floor with
Yeah.
that pain-filled joy, joy-filled pain. It was the holiest thing I'd ever seen. And so that was it.
It is like music. It is beautiful. It is
Yeah.
something harmonious to
Yeah.
bring a child into the world.
Yeah, it is. And
Uh,
modern medicine messes it up a lot. I remember being at Dartmouth with all these at the time, sort of Aryan gods and goddesses, and we had to put the drapes on these women and then whisk the baby off to the nursery to clean it up, and the mothers would be, looking like, "I would just like to hold my baby." See, back in that time, we still had twilight sleep. They were drugging women in labor with, Seconal and scopolamine, so they would kinda lose their minds, be tied down like wild animals, and then 3 days later, they'd wake up and the doctor would present them with the baby. So all that oxytocin, all that wonderful bonding stuff went to the obstetrician, not to the baby and not to the husband. So women would have dreams back then of dancing with their obstetricians.
oh my
I'm
gosh.
not I'm not kidding, yeah. So I kinda question a lot of that, and I remember the first time I put a baby on the mother's abdomen, my, mentor, Cambridge City Hospital, he goes, "Her hand touched your glove. You're not sterile." I said, "Dr. McGovern, I just took a baby out of the vagina. The only way to sterilize it is to boil it." I mean, really, we did we were treating birth like a surgical procedure.
I really appreciate you saying that. It's very clear that, a pregnant woman gets, hustled through a hospital much like a sick person.
Yes. Yes.
And it's really, it's normalized. It's just how it is. If you do it any differently, they consider you to be, unsophisticated, uninformed, or at worst, dangerous, like a
Yes.
dangerous, irresponsible mother to do it any other way. Um, how did we get here? I've met a few midwives. They're really interesting people. Midwifery is still pretty popular in Europe. It's a skilled profession. You go to school for it. You become a licensed midwife. There's still a licensure avenue here in the United States too, but it's still very much underground here in the United States, and it's kind of shunned upon.
Well, there's 2 groups now. What's interesting is the, hospital-based midwives, or the ones who are licensed, they're now starting to be called medwives, and they're
Midwives.
becoming more and more interventional and fear-based. So, I had one of my friends who had lost a baby in the 2nd trimester, was having a home birth, and the midwife starts in with the fear-mongering, and my friend goes, "Get out of here. Get out of here." And they just delivered the baby at home, she and her husband. So there's so much fear. There's some documentaries, you might have seen them, called The Burning Times, where 9 million women, mostly midwives, herbalists, and so on, were burned at the stake as
Holy
witches.
moly, I have not watched that film. I thought you were going to mention the movie about C-sections, The Business of Birth, I think is the name of it.
Yes.
But holy cow, I thought that one was bad, but this one is really bad. What is this film called
It's called
again?
The Burning Times.
The
Check it
Burning
out.
Times.
There were
Good
whole
lord.
towns in Germany that didn't have a single female. So we realize that there's been kind of a war on female power, and I'm not talking about women becoming men, and I'm really not talking about the ultimate feminist issue now is men becoming women and taking over women-only spaces. I mean, I couldn't have seen that coming in a million years, ever. So, I mean, our governor just apparently had a $50,000 grant of taxpayers' money for nursing bras for trans men. I mean, okay, just
This is why you opened, this podcast by saying I was radicalized as a child. You are not radical. You are you are a woman who is protecting women's rights to conceive and know their own bodies and to have children, healthy children, and to maintain their health throughout the entire process, to understand what it means to be a woman. What world do we live in which that's considered radical? I it is we need to take back feminism from this BS that's happening that is trying to eliminate women. It is the worst form of malicious patriarchy being
yes.
shrouded. It's masked. It's masked patriarchy as feminism. They're trying to take even our language away. They're trying to take our identity away as women, and it is one of the most deceitful forms of toxic patriarchy I've ever seen.
Well, during the whole last 4 years, I came upon the Bible in a new way, particularly Ephesians. We battle not against flesh and blood, but against powers and principalities of darkness that are not of this world. And so I think that what we've been under is this sort of spell. And then I also learned that the Bible is a contract between the people of God and Satan. And this is the work of Cal Washington. That it's amazing work. And so when you realize that, and you realize that, whenever an official, whether it's the Queen of England or whatever, when they take their vows, they're putting their hand on the Bible because it is a contract. And so we need to realize that we've had this inversion, right? So up is down, down is up. The beauty of my career is that I was there in the front lines when so much changed because of the women's movement. So the doctors were afraid of women getting their own pregnancy tests because they said they won't be able to handle it. The doctors were afraid of having the husbands in the delivery room. All of that stuff came tumbling down. But then what did we do? We overshot. We literally threw out the baby with the bathwater. So that in my generation, women were having their first abortions at the age when their mothers were having their first babies. And so now we've got an entire group of women who think abortion is a sacrament when it should be the last possible resort.
I was raised in the 90s and I was taught about abortion in the 90s. I was a really young girl and I was told that it is a woman's right to choose. But how I interpreted it was that it was a last resort. It was in an extreme circumstance
Yes.
and it was a last resort. And also, it was a big painful decision. And so that's the cultural norm around abortion. That's my framework. That's what I grew up with. This is very different than what a 16-year-old girl is taught today.
Correct. So what we need to do is get back to, because I remember, I did my training in the 70s. So I was watching the end result of free love, the love revolution, like sleep with whoever you want. And there's no such thing as free love. Women have got to take back agency over their own bodies. And I remember a woman I met, Jean Parvati Baker, who wrote a book called Conscious Conception. And she said, I made the decision at the age of 16 to become sexually active. And I only chose men who would be a good father if a child were ever conceived. We can no longer separate sexuality from conception and pregnancy and fathering. Okay, so here's my big message to young women now, and I'm just gonna talk about men and women, okay? Men and women. Um, Men fall in love with virtue, not vaginas. So we've taught all these women that, this is, if you don't sleep with him on the first date, he's not gonna like you, and the exact opposite is true. So it's kind of a return to some moral fiber, and it's interesting to me that sales of the Bible are up 22%, and we've had the largest baptisms in human history now. People are coming back to more morality. Like, you don't just use other people's bodies for your own pleasure, you see?
It's really interesting. We're talking about the Bible within the context of being a woman, right?
Yes.
Like we came on together today to talk about being a woman and being a healthy woman and women's rights, like real women's rights, and as it relates to love, as it relates to menopause, as it relates to aging, as it relates to childbearing, as it relates to family planning. I mean, all of these wonderful, important, big decisions that are, life changing decisions. That's what we came on to talk about. And here we are talking about spirituality and the Bible. And I think that, I studied world religions. I traveled and backpacked all over Asia. I wrote my undergraduate thesis on religious constitutional freedoms in China and India.
Mm.
And I compared the two because there's so many ancient traditions of Asia, and India is like very much into open shows of religion, and China was like only five religions are going to be accepted, and all others are considered cults. And I was fascinated with it, and then I kept falling. I fell in love with a Jewish man in my 20s, and I converted to Judaism because I thought, "Well, this is such an intellectual religion."
Yes. Mhm.
And so I've been Jewish since, I've been Jewish since my early 20s. It's probably been about 13 or 14 years now. But like you and like, millions of others around the world, I have recently been spending a lot of time with the Bible and spending a lot of time with the word of Jesus Christ and realizing the importance of the New Testament, to interpret the Old Testament.
That's it.
And then also understanding this idea of sacrifice and this, very real occurrence that happens. It's this interface that happens between the human and the non-human world.
Mhm.
And sacrifice, since ancient times, whether it be animal sacrifice or human sacrifice, has been used to, subvert types of power or to move power in the world. And I don't want to get, I'm just speaking about this intellectually and historically, but
Right.
it was very, very common, human and animal sacrifice. And there's no greater sacrifice than sacrificing your child. It's always been considered since biblical and pre-biblical times to be the highest form of sacrifice. It's this idea that you will deprive, yourself of something for something else. But what is that for something else? And that is where deceit has come in historically. And all of our ancient texts talk about that kind of deceit of getting people to sacrifice something of their own for something else, and to be deceived to sacrifice something so great for someone else's gain. I mean, that is a tale that has been described time and time again through history. So here we are now in the modern age that is very secular. And we're seeing people doing just extraordinarily, harmful things to themselves in the name of something else. And it kind of reminds me of how the Bible and, pre-biblical texts talk about sacrifice. And then Jesus Christ, which I'm learning more and more about, was like, you don't need to go and do these sacrifices. I will be
I
the
did it
ultimate
already.
Yes. Yes.
And if we are who the Bible says we are, you
Yeah.
have dudamus, it's called power. You have power and authority. Now, most Christians don't know that. I mean, I believe that we should. What did Jesus say? These things and more ye shall do also. So during COVID, I watched all kinds of Christians sort of fold. And I remember thinking, if Jesus were alive today, he didn't need a syringe to raise Lazarus, who'd been dead for 4 days. I believe that we we humans, and that's my next book that I'm writing called Made in the Image of God. What does that actually mean? Because we have this ability. Even Cliff High, the technical guy who's quite funny, he says humans are actually the cool kids on the block. Um, we have way more power than we think we do. Power to heal. I'm friends with a lot of people who've had near death experiences and they come back, like Daniel Brinkley, the Marine assassin who was dead for 30 minutes. And Daniel goes, I would still be doing those same things, but I was on the other side and I know the rules. So I think we're in this time of ascension. But in terms of women's health, there's something happening that's so interesting to me, and that is this free birth thing. Have you seen that channel on YouTube? It's free birth where couples just go, I am not interested in what they're gonna do in the hospital. The vitamin K, the hepatitis B that gives you all that aluminum, and then the vitamin K is hypercoagulable blood, and, like, you're having to fight with the staff of the hospital when you are in the most tender, vulnerable time of your life, and they're acting like they own your baby, and, so these couples are just doing free birth. No mainstream prenatal care. no nothing. We're just going to do this now. Do I think that that is a great idea? Not particularly, but when you watch, and it's amazing, their YouTube videos, they show you the whole thing, the whole thing.
Wow.
And no one is there except the man and the woman, and and there's the baby, and there's no trauma to recover from. There's a lot of trauma in a lot of hospital births. Now, I spent years doing everything I could to decrease the trauma. We would do Laboyer births and we would dim the lights. And, the cord should not be clamped. It should just stop pulsating. That's how the baby gets all the blood it needs, all the stem cells it needs. But, I don't know if you ever watched the TV show ER, but I did. And, they would show these women coming in and, they'd have some kind of thing happen in the ER because if a woman's pregnant, everyone kind of loses their mind. But they're always sent up to labor and delivery. I mean, they never do anything in the emergency room. But we have this lifetime of, oh my God, she's pregnant. And the next thing you know, she's dead. I mean, it's this collective thing instead of this healthy, normal thing.
I mean, you can say the same thing about puberty now. Kids are going through puberty and it's like, "Oh my god." Like, what do we do? And it's rather than being treated as this just normal, beautiful thing, that is a process that takes time, that is a journey, and
Right.
everyone's journey is a little different, and it is a coming of age, right? And it's going to be hard. There's going to be heartbreak, there's going to be confusion. There's going to be hormones. And, now today we have endocrine disruptors to deal with as well in addition to the hormones. So, it is a vulnerable thing. Pregnancy is a vulnerable thing, and it has been completely co-opted by extremist maximalist thinking. Puberty is a vulnerable thing, has been co-opted by maximalist thinking. And guess what? Both are now being monetized in extraordinary ways.
Yes. And menopause too.
And menopause, one of the most vulnerable things.
Yeah. Well, what I've always said,
Yeah.
the processes of the female body are physical metaphors for the way the divine or God comes into 3D matter. And so when you understand that there's great wisdom in those processes, and they don't need to be medicalized, but they do need to be spiritualized. So the menstrual cycle in particular is this cycle of creativity. Like at ovulation, if you don't get pregnant, if you don't conceive, then you're preparing to give birth to something from deep within you. And our culture doesn't particularly like that. We like it when the woman is on estrogen and she wants to fold the towels and make the flower arrangements and do everything for everyone else. But the second half of the cycle is all about giving birth to herself. And she gets like 360 opportunities to do this with the menstrual cycle. And then perimenopause is like the luteal phase of the menstrual cycle on steroids because it's grow or die. And that's why women suffer at perimenopause because they've been doing things that are a sin against their soul. And the body goes, time's up. We've let you get away with that in your 20s and 30s. You did fine with that. Like, you could get into the little black dress on a Friday night by dieting all week. We're not going to let you do that anymore. So every phase of a woman's life has such great meaning. Let me tell you a story about how biosymbolic the female body is. So, I have a patient come in, and she had these two kind of big breast cysts. You could tell that they seemed to be fluid filled. And as I always did, I said to her, okay, what's been going on in your life in the areas of nurturing, giving, and receiving? So she told me the following story. Her cat of 20 years had recently died. And anyone who's got a pet, you know that that is just it's painful. Then her last child, her youngest child, a daughter, she had just taken to college. which, by the way, is when most women have their last menstrual period, when they take their final kid to college. And then she'd had a dream about nursing that girl who had just gone off to college. In the morning, she woke up with the breast cysts. I aspirated them. She was postmenopausal. I aspirated them. They were full of milk.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that reminds me of the story of women, who have, stopped breastfeeding for years and years and years, and all of a sudden they'll hear a baby cry,
Yeah, boom.
and they'll,
Yeah, the letdown
let down.
reflex. You know,
Yeah.
I had a midwife friend. She'd sit in labor and delivery, hear a newborn cry, and she'd go, "Oh God."
These are beautiful, natural, healthy expressions of womanhood,
Yeah.
and, they should be celebrated, and they should be talked about and understood. And they should be we should be looking at how to protect these. There's something very sacred about this.
Yes.
Um, and I'm starting to get very alarmed by signals that the mainstream is sending us. There was an op-ed in the New York Times where someone was trying to say that maternal instinct is not real and that it is made up by the patriarchy to control women.
Oh my God. See the inversion? It's exactly the opposite. Exactly.
It's exactly the opposite. But let's talk about why it's the opposite. Why maternal instinct is real and why it is empowering and it is probably one of the most feminist qualities that we ought to be celebrating and protecting.
Well, first of all, any pediatrician worth his or her salt knows. You ask the mother, think about this. That baby was formed in your body. Your body made the eyes and the ears and the intestines. Your body did that. So don't you think you would be the person who would most know what's normal for that child? But you see, we're talked out of that. We are talked out of that. And now you go in. I mean, you and we've heard these stories over and over. I went in. They were gonna, they lined up all the syringes because they were gonna bring my kid up to date on the schedule. Um, and I didn't want to do it, but I doubted myself because what do I know? I'm not a doctor. No, you know plenty. You're a mother. And so what we've systematically done, I said this years ago, the well baby check was just an opportunity to indoctrinate your kid into the medical pharmaceutical complex. And with my own kids, they would say to me, Mom, are we ever going to see a doctor? It's like, probably not. I mean, their father and I were doctors, but I didn't take them in for well baby checks because I knew what that was. That's just to get them used to going in and getting another shot. That's what pediatrics has become, the opportunity to get another shot. So it's the same old inversion. Up is down, down is up.
Yeah, it's yeah, I that screaming
Yes.
voice inside of me that I didn't listen to
Yeah.
because I was, told that the medical profession is right and I'm a new mom. What do I know?
Right. And if you're a new mom, you're so vulnerable.
So beyond, I like vulnerable beyond, and you want what's best for your child, and every cell in your body wants what's best for your child, but your cells in your body kind of already sending you those signs very early on, and when we are uh, severed from that, so that creates, I think, a whole um host of psychological trauma in women when they are severed from that instinct.
Yes,
And
and so way back, in the '80s, Marshall Klaus and John Kennel wrote a book called Mother-Infant Bonding. Now, why did they write this book? Because John Kennel started the first neonatal intensive care unit at Rainbow Children's Hospital in Cleveland, and they would be taking care of these preemies in isolates. which no one had really done before. And they were getting these babies healthy and out the door. And they came back to the emergency room battered at a way higher rate than they ever should have. And this got Dr. Kennel to thinking, why is that? And they began to study bonding and the orchestration of hormones that is supposed to take place when you give birth to a baby, where you keep the baby with you and you are taken care of beautifully. I can remember a woman who came from a traditional Japanese family, and the mother is mothered for 3 months. The whole fourth trimester where she's just wrapped up and she's fed and she's cared for because this is going to imprint the baby for the rest of their lives together. Nothing is more important. Well, that's not what we do now. What do? We clamp the cord, we take the baby to the nursery, we undermine the woman's ability to take care of the baby. Oh, and she has to go back to work at 6 weeks. I mean, everything we do is kind of industrialized instead of this is that sacred time of life. And because we don't do the fourth trimester, we have all this postpartum depression because all of these hormones of bonding kind of get thrown out. And what Klaus and Kennel found is there is a sensitive period. Every animal has it. In a goat, it's about an hour. So if you take a baby goat away the minute it's born, the mother won't there won't be any problem whatsoever. And this is how goat farmers do it and keep their goats for milking. They have the baby and then they bottle feed the baby and the mother goat's okay and then they just keep milking her. In humans, the more you interrupt this sensitive phase, the more she's going to have trouble bonding with the baby. Now, this is interesting. I work with a medical intuitive, Julie Ryan, and she said when a baby is going to be given up for adoption or whatever the politically correct term is, there's some other term they're using now, but given up for adoption covers it. And she said you can actually see before the baby is born, you can see a little light on the shoulder of the mother who's going to adopt that baby. So it's a much bigger thing. I mean, it's like if you didn't get that initial bonding, all is not lost, and I want people to know that. It's kind of like if you have a hysterectomy, it doesn't mean you've messed up your pelvic bowl for the rest of your life, you know? You don't wanna get, fundamentalist about this, but in general, you try to support the natural thing as much as you possibly can.
Wow. I mean, that's beautiful. I do think spirituality and human existence and remembering that bringing in a child, mothering a child, growing a child in the womb is a deeply, deeply spiritual experience. And to claim otherwise is a kind of a path towards nihilistic destruction of our species, which is kind of what we're seeing right now, let's be honest.
Well, no, we really are. I mean, the fertility rate is like this. On the other hand, at our church, we have 250 kids. And we're thinking we got to build a school, and we want to have a school where you don't need all of these requirements with the thing. And so I see, and by the way, and the Dead Sea is starting to get fresh water coming up. It's kind of biblical, so that new life is coming into the Dead Sea. So I believe yes, we're seeing a breakdown of all the institutions we trusted. I can tell you that. All of the Ivy League colleges, all the medical schools, all the hospitals, it's all coming down. What will come, though? This is the beauty of humanity. We rise up like the phoenix from the ashes. So the Dead Sea is now getting all this fresh water coming up from below, and there's fish, and there's all of this happening. And we have now women who are having 2, 3, 4 children. And let's be clear, men are a good man is to protect and serve. I mean, and yes, women have to hold the moral fiber. It's easier for men to get a little bit off track. They need to protect and serve. And the good ones do that. They do that. Their hearts, okay. Women wear our hearts here. Our breasts stick out. They're young. So we sort of love actively, right? Well, a man's heart is hidden. Where he's young is down in the second chakra. He's down below the waterline. And a woman, to get into her heart, to get into her pants, as it were, then you've got to get to her heart. And by the way, the cervix is the heart in reflexology points, and the tip of the penis is the heart in reflexology points, which is why you don't want to sleep around with people you don't love.
Yeah. No, gosh. Yeah. It is really um nothing crueler that you can do to your heart.
Yes,
It's a
that's it.
form of self-hatred, really. It's
Yes,
quite empty and cold, and it's kind of a it's just like trampling on something as precious as your loving life force.
that's right. Yeah.
Um, can we talk about menopause?
Love to. Love
Okay.
to. Yes.
It is not really discussed freely, and or understood. I was just approached by a friend of mine this morning, and she said, "Can you ask Dr. Northrup about hormone replacement therapy?" And I said, "I will, but the last I heard about the stuff they'll give you as prescription, they're still using, I think, isn't it a horse urine?
Yeah.
Something derived from horse urine that they're giving to women, and they're calling it hormone replacement therapy?"
I have to laugh because, this book, The Wisdom of Menopause, you see how thick it is? It's got all the stuff in here. It got everything you need to know. Because I was a pioneer in the bioidentical hormone replacement world in the 90s. And that's why I was on Oprah with Suzanne Summers and all of that. So here's what you need to know about hormones. It's very easy to get the hormones that exactly match what's in the human female body. Those are called bioidentical. Now, you cannot patent anything that God created in God's world. Anything naturally occurring, you can't patent. So, what have they done? They have taken a regular hormone and added things to it so it could be patented. An example is natural progesterone, which is what is produced by the corpus luteum, this little part of the ovary. After an egg pops out, you get this little cyst that produces progesterone. It's warming, it's calming, and it's produced in huge amounts in pregnancy. So that's you need that, and then you need some estrogen at the same time. Now, there's two ways to go about it. You can do the bioidenticals, or you can do the phytohormones, the plant hormones. So I have where I did a great deal of research on a Thai herb called Pueraria mirifica, which has the highest level of phytohormone known to humans. It's been used for 700 years in Thailand. So you can use things of that nature that are not prescription, or you can use bioidenticals. Now, formulary pharmacists have been able to produce a prescription individualized for you. And that could be pellets under the skin, creams, pills, vaginal suppositories. There's a lot of different ways to get it into the body. What they've done, the pharmaceutical companies, they've patented the glue, for instance, that holds a bioidentical patch on the body. So the Vivel dot, the Estroderm patch, that's all bioidentical estrogen. And then you can get bioidentical progesterone. There's a pill called Prometrium that's bioidentical. Now, there's a war against the formulary pharmacists because they're producing, they just get USP, United States Pharmacopoeia. They get all of the raw materials and then they can put it together for you. Big Pharma doesn't want that. They want to just have their own. Now, the Women's Health Initiative, which started in 1994, the first year that Women's Bodies, Women's Wisdom came out, I said in my book then, they're using the wrong hormone at the wrong dose. They're not individualizing it, and they're not going to find what they were looking for. So here's what they did in 94. They had some idea that because HDL cholesterol went up when you were on uh, Premarin, pregnant mare's urine. That's what Premarin is. Okay. But because HDL went up, they were going to say that hormone replacement, everyone needed to be on hormone replacement because it would decrease heart disease, the number one killer of women. Well, lo and behold, 2002 comes along and I'm on a whale watch in Cape Cod Bay, and the Wall Street Journal calls me and said, they've just stopped the Women's Health Initiative because they're finding too many women are getting heart attacks. And I'm thinking, bingo, you weren't using bioidentical hormones at individualized doses. They were using synthetic progesterone called Provera, medroxyprogesterone acetate. It is not the same as regular progesterone. So they then stopped the Women's Health Initiative cold, and all these women are now scared to death. They're getting hot flashes back like mad, and it never needed to happen that way. So you do an individualized dose at the lowest possible dose. Start with an herb, it works way better. Get through that process where you're skipping ovulations. And what it is, and this is so important, it is the dictates of your soul have to take precedence. Otherwise, you're going to get sick. The body won't let you get away with it. And that's why we say at the age of 50, now you need your colonoscopy and you need your mammograms and you need your screening. And it's like, you don't need any of that. It's grow or die. That's what perimenopause is. It's PMS on steroids. And sometimes it's seasonal affective disorder, which is, I call it the PMS of the annual calendar.
Yeah.
Oh, there's so much women can do, but the main thing is realize it is a fantastic reinvention. And by the way, I have to put this out there. It's women in their 60s and 70s having the best sex of their lives.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's wonderful to hear.
Isn't it great news? Yeah.
And how do you chart a path to that? Like, if you're in your 40s.
Well, I wrote this book, Goddesses Never Age. This is the path. This is the path. It has to do, though, with the way you think. Okay. It starts with cognition. And I've worked with Dr. Mario Martinez, who's followed 700 healthy centenarians all over the world in every continent. And he said the centenarians all think alike. They live in subcultures of wellness. They're future oriented. They practice exalted emotions and elevated cognition and righteous anger. And they just do not. They don't do the thing that we all do, which is this. Well, now that I'm 50, it's too late to whatever. It's literally a way of thinking your way to chronic health, as Ellen Langer says, and she's the mother of mindfulness, professor emeritus at Harvard.
Can you give me an example of an exalted emotion, in your 50s?
Yes. Okay. This is me. This just happened. I mean, it happened in my 50s. Okay. I wanted to learn Argentine Tango so badly. I'd always wanted to partner dance. So I go down to Main Ballroom Dance. It's a snowy January night on Congress Street. It's kind of a dodgy neighborhood. I look in the window and this couple is doing this Argentine Tango dance. And I'm thinking, oh God, I want to learn this. But there's too many women and not enough men, and I then forced myself to take lessons, and then I went in there, and then over time, I found a chiropractor friend who wanted a partner, and then the 2 of us practiced, and in January of 2010, I went to a dance in at the Elks Club in Bath, Maine, and I won the tango competition. I don't think anyone else knew anything about it. I will never forget it. I'm driving home. It's midnight. I have my little trophy that I have won for the Argentine tango. I called my daughters. I was so excited. And then the other thing that would happen is I did tango a lot for 9 years. And if it was after midnight and I was driving home, and the streetlights had started to blink because, it was after midnight, so they were just blinking, you didn't have to wait for the stop sign. I'd go, I've still got it.
There you go. That's awesome. I love that story. I actually just became quite good friends with this 85-year-old woman who is a traveling tennis pro.
Wow.
And I've started taking lessons with her, and just being around her is inspiring for
Right?
me.
Right.
I'm gonna be 40 next year. So it's my last year in my 30s, which is a pretty transformative year for a lot of women. You're saying goodbye to your 20s and your 30s, which kind of mush together,
Yeah.
and 40 and 50 mushes together, and then it seems like 60 and 70 mushes together, and then you have, if you get to your 80s, it's just like hallelujah. um like that's, I mean, that's how I naively am thinking about this all at this point. But yeah, it's very interesting because, and I think now we can pivot the conversation to a little bit about what it means to be a 39-year-old woman in the year of 2024. Because it's different than it was in, 1990.
It is, but I'll tell you what, though, there are principles that remain where we go back to God and biology. So, the feminine path is always about the way the egg works as opposed to how the sperm works, okay? So, think about the feminine path. It's all about receiving. So when you have an egg, it bursts forth and it's surrounded by these wonderful kind of nurse cells called the cumulus oophrus, and it's very beautiful. And then it sends out a chemical signal to the sperm, and the sperm swim madly toward the egg. And the egg chooses which sperm to let in. She chooses. And then if the sperm is a little wonky, needs a little buffing up, and we always know that the men who are with women always look better because they need to be egged on, as it were. But the egg can literally repair some of those defects, little defects in the sperm. And then the egg has the picnic basket for the 3-day spiral journey down the umbilical cord into the uterus where the placenta starts to be made. Now, what does that mean? It means that you, as a woman, have this attractive power. So I'm gonna tell you how to use it. I mean, and this worked better before everyone was fricking on their cell phones, staring.
Well, yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about, is like, what are all of the things disrupting this natural process?
Yeah, so what you wanna do as much as possible is make eye contact with somebody. It's called signaling. When you are doing standard Argentine tango in Buenos Aires, the way you get a dance is you look, and it's called the mirada. You're looking around the room, and then the partner, if you meet the eye contact, he will nod, and that's called the cabeceo. It's all done with the eyes, so no one has to feel bad. They can look down or whatever it is. And that's how powerful. Now, I want you to know, let's say that you're out and about and you see a man who looks attractive. Practice looking and holding it for 5 seconds. It'll be one of the most difficult things you've ever done.
Well, I'm in a committed partnership, and I will try that in the kitchen later
That's
today.
good. Okay, try that in the kitchen. And then the other thing that you wanna do is, again, with your partner, look at something in your partner that you find attractive and put your entire focus on your female erotic anatomy and watch what happens.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
There's all these caves in old Europe, that are all like female genitalia and, when God was a woman and all of that stuff. There's huge power in our bodies that we don't even know about.
Well, can we talk about, like, I am one of these modern women. All of my friends are these modern women. And and I'm constantly approached, because I have been in the field of women's reproductive longevity, funding it, realizing that in the United States, it's almost impossible to fund real foundational research in the United States in this field. But in Singapore, I've actually seen some good results and good papers come out. And PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, which so many women have today, are diagnosed with it. And if you go to an IVF clinic, they'll tell you it's a negative sign for fertility. In Singapore, my team there just found out that it's actually a positive sign for fertility, that PCOS, women with PCOS are 3 times more likely to conceive naturally than women without PCOS. And I was asking the researchers there, I was like, what is the deal with that? And we were brainstorming and we were like, the body is so wise. What could it possibly be trying to protect? It's probably trying to protect the egg. And if you're creating this huge cyst around the egg at the time of ovulation, it's probably protecting itself from adverse environmental exposure. And so then I think about our environment and I'm reading all the papers because that's what I do. And I'm like, there's all of these new papers coming out about consumer electronics and non-native radiation coming, electromagnetic radiation coming from cell phone towers and Wi-Fi. And, there's all this stuff that is only accumulating in number and density in our environment. Microplastics are only accumulating. Shauna Swan, I was on a panel with her many, many years ago, and she's been writing about this stuff for years. And so then here we are with this new discovery in Singapore that has not made its rounds yet in the United States. And I think it really made me pause, and it really made me think about how much the body wants to protect life. It is a natural program of our body to do whatever it needs to do to protect probably the most precious function that occurs in human biology, which is the delivery of an egg from an ovary.
Yes. And here's the thing. Okay, so you probably saw Jurassic Park. And remember, they go boom, boom, boom. And the guy goes, "Oh, they're all females. Don't worry. All the dinosaurs are females." And then the other actor goes, "Nature always finds a way." So remember, life wants to give birth to life, and nature takes the raw material and creates life. And right now we have, again, back to Ephesians, we battle not. We've got these forces that are anti life, that want to make abortion a sacrament. The Church of Satan will send you mifepristone so that you can have a satanic abortion. This is insanity. So let's remember. I remember a woman won the Nobel Prize for her work with corn, Z. Mays, and they asked her, Barbara McClintock, how did you manage to do this work? And she said, it's about having a feeling for the organism. If we approach the female reproductive system, if we approach women, if we approach an animal or a plant, we have those studies, where the messages in water by Masaru Emoto, we're 70% water. When you put love into water and then you do this quick freeze, you will see these beautiful patterns. When you say to the water, I hate you, then you get a terrible pattern. We need to learn how we bring this incredible biophotonic light, which is what we're made out of, how we bring it into coherence. And then I believe we will have the ability to transcend all of this stuff. You see, the only reason that we still have all this pollution and all of the rest of it is that humans haven't awakened to who we are. And we haven't had enough righteous anger to say, stop it. I'm not doing it. You see, can you imagine if at the beginning of this thing we just went through, if everyone said, "That's ridiculous. How did you all get those circles and those arrows? How did those land in every grocery store overnight while all the 5G towers went up like mushrooms? How did that happen?" What if we had all said, "We're not doing it?"
Let's talk about that. So you just had a major milestone.
Yep.
You 4 years in the making. You've just published a pretty compelling paper showing that the vaccine is leading to issues around maternal health, impacting the female reproductive system and causing, I mean, I'll just say it, it's causing a lot of misery in the world. So 4 years you've been working on this. How did you first see a sign that there was something wrong, something happening?
In April of 2021, when they were rolling out the COVID shot, we were noticing that all these women were having bleeding. Women who hadn't had the shot were having bleeding. We were getting calls. This is the a group of doctors that I have worked with around the country. 2-year-olds being around recently vaccinated grandparents would have bleeding. 90-year-olds were calling me. Women were unable to travel. They would be bleeding for 100 days, some of them hemorrhaging. There were Facebook groups of 17,000, 100,000 women weighing in, support groups. Then they were just censored and removed overnight. So I was talking with Tiffany Parado, who had also been a strategist for our disinformation dozen thing when, I was one of the disinformation dozen by the Center for the Countering of Digital Hate out of London, where they named 12 of us as responsible for 70% of the disinformation on COVID on the internet.
Oh my
Um,
God. I wasn't
so
aware of that. I'm
Oh, yeah.
sorry.
Yeah, that was a nice little witch hunt. So if you were to, just put in the disinformation dozen, you will see every newspaper on the entire planet named all of us. And we all lost our Instagram channels and all of that. But so what we did, I was at the very first Clay Clark Reawaken America event, and he'd asked me to talk about what's in the shot. And as I'm sitting there, I'm thinking, how are we going to study this? Because they're blocking every angle. They're blocking this information from getting out there. And these are women's stories. My whole life has been to validate women's stories of what's happening in their bodies. Anyway, I was sitting next to a guy named Warren Geek who happened to have a database company and 3 daughters. So he was concerned. Well, then he said, I can do this. And then Tiffany and a bunch of others put together a survey, and we eventually got 6,000 women who hadn't had the shot. They didn't have COVID, negative PCR test, no symptoms whatsoever. And we began to study them. And here's one of the things we found. In the world literature, there are only 40 cases of what's called decidual cast shedding, where the entire inside of the uterus comes out, usually after 3 days of cramping. 40 in the world literature. In our database of 6,000 women, there were 240 cases of decidual cast shedding. Women would send us pictures that looked like a plaster of Paris cast of the inside of their uterus. Then what we did is with all of the right statistical analyses, we're able to find that within 3 days of someone close to them getting the shot, 70% of the women in our study were having abnormal bleeding, and it continues to this day. Sometimes kids get nosebleeds. It's usually around a recently vaccinated person. So and by the way, in the original Pfizer trials, they said no man should get a woman pregnant for 6 months, and it was a reportable event to touch a pregnant woman if you'd had the shot, which they instantly hid. And so you have to ask yourself, what did they know? What is being shed? We don't know to this day. Women are saying, specific women, I can't go out into a group unless I'm willing to have abnormal periods for 3 months. So
Wow.
we just got our paper published in the International Journal of Vaccine Theory, Practice, and Research. Menstrual abnormalities strongly associated with proximity to COVID-19 vaccinated individuals. Now, we ran into roadblock after roadblock after roadblock. As you might imagine, nobody wanted to publish this. It's peer review. We put together a wonderful team of all volunteers to do this. We had Dr. James Thorpe, maternal fetal medicine, Sue Peters. We had all kinds of people who knew what they were doing, OB-GYNs, statisticians, people who public health people. And we all became a family. Like, let's just get this done. No, we weren't funded by anything except God.
Mhm. I know that feeling.
You do, yes.
Can you, um, share some hope for us who are, suffering from I clearly this is leading to the increase in miscarriage rates. It's leading to increases in infertility rates. What are the protocols that you've seen that can help the body heal? And how can we help these women that can't go out because they're so sensitive to spike protein contamination in their body?
Well, it's really interesting that since we don't know if it's spike protein or if it's a little parasite or if it's an exosome, we don't know. So I'm working with the 5 docs group so that we can put together a white paper of at least make recommendations, even though we don't know what exactly it is. But what we can say is if you allow yourself to be grounded on the earth, standing on the earth on a beach barefoot, if you can't be with your feet, put your back up against a tree. Grounding. We are electromagnetic, biophotonic creatures. And our bodies are batteries. And so when you understand how to be in your body as a battery with your Earth star 2 feet under your feet, even if you're on a plane, and then your sun star above your head, and you've got this biophotonic electromagnetic field around you, we literally can manipulate it with our breath and our intention. And the standing waves outside it generally hold the trauma, and the trauma needs to be healed within our body, and that's done with crying, movement, and tears. So, movement, sound, and tears will change this. And I've seen many people go on to get pregnant, no problem. Ivermectin helps. Nicotine, Brian Artis talks about the snake venom that might be around, but it is the sunlight, and Dr. Jack Kruse's amazing work with
Yeah,
light,
yeah.
and that's what we're made out of. So you got to get in touch with the part of you that's made in the image of God and lean on that part. Don't spend any time with the mainstream media because it's all black pilling. It's all fear porn, and fear will shut down every biologic process in your body. That's how we got here, with everyone being scared to death. What if you're not scared? What if you can transcend all of this with your frequency? And that's what's happening, by the way. Astrologically, we know this is what's happening. The work of Pam Gregory, that wonderful British astrologer, she'll point out we're in ascension. People are becoming way more intuitive. They're, they're reading about Jesus. They're having a relationship with Jesus. It's not religion. Religion is rules without relationship. Forget about religion, not
Wow,
interested,
amen.
you know. So where we're going is so exciting. This has been foretold for a long time.
I don't know how we continue this conversation beyond that. I feel like that was just the perfect way to wrap up one of the most inspiring chats I've had in a very long time.
Great.
I'm in tears. Dr. Northrup, is there anything else we can share? We have your books, we have your paper, which remind us again where we can find the publication.
Okay, the publication is the International Journal of Vaccine Theory, practice, and research. And its menstrual abnormalities strongly associated with proximity to COVID-19 vaccinated individuals. But you can find the study and our others on mycyclestory.com.
mycyclestory.com.
Yeah.
Oh, Dr. Northrup, thank you for all that you do, the wisdom you share and protect and carry forward, the reminders that we can heal our bodies in spite of these many, many spiritual afflictions that might surround the people around us and
Oh,
ourselves.
we can. We can heal anything. Yes.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.